there was a point. Well, many of my friends know that, especially around when the threat to out me came, I was thinking of killing myself. I thought it would be easier than disgracing my family, and so the reason why I outed myself instead of killing myself is that, well, let's see how bad it can get. Let's see how bad it can. I can kill myself anytime. Let's see how bad it can get.
We'll come back to that in just a moment. This is Asia Now, the podcast featuring stories and interviews from the Asia Pacific region. One billion children around the globe live in poverty. As a result, 22,000 die each and every day. Today, how one former graduate student is making a difference. It's one conversation taking place in Asia now. Hello everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Asia Now on our new home, Saturday mornings. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video version on YouTube. I know it's just a still, but this interview was recorded a while ago. Or if you're listening via iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, TuneIn, thank you so much for taking some of your time to listen to this interview. So here's the deal. Many people try to make a difference in the world. They go down to the local shelter, maybe they donate clothing or food. Sometimes they even donate some of their hard-earned cash to help out a cause or two. Even back in the day, I've spent a few holidays and Sunday afternoons at shelters lending a hand. But all of this pales in comparison to what my guests today decided to do. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Shawn Ahmed. I have known him for years on YouTube, and it's my pleasure to welcome him to Asia Now. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time out for this. I have a question for you before we dive into the meat of our conversation. I'd like for you to share with our listeners where you're originally from and, well, where do you spend most of your time these days?
All right, that's not an easy question. That's actually a bit of a long story. My parents are from Bangladesh, and they were from there when it was called East Pakistan. They were born just after the partition. Basically, that area used to be part of India, colonial India. Gandhi happened, and that created what we know as East Pakistan and West Pakistan. West Pakistan now is called Bangladesh. My parents survived the War of Liberation there, which happened in the 1970s. My mom was in a POW camp. She really didn't talk a lot about it. My dad had to lie his way out of a firing squad.
Wow.
Because they survived, I'm alive here to do this interview. It was quite the experience, and they actually emigrated to North America, and they ended up settling in Canada. It was a bit of a tricky situation for them. They came from a middle class and upper middle class family, but then they came here and they found that the money doesn't go as far, and they actually were on charity. They got their first jacket from the Salvation Army, their first bed from a church group that donated to them, or that a group that helped them get their first bed from the Salvation Army. And I was born in Canada. And it was after my dad struggled to get a job. He was top of his class at Notre Dame College, which is a high school created by the same people that made the University of Notre Dame. And then he was top of his class in a university in engineering. But those degrees didn't translate to Canada. So he got his master's here in Canada, and he eventually got a job. And I was born in the 1980s in a border town. And from there, we've been all over the place. I grew up in Jersey. So I notice like Canadians say XYZ or XYZ. I say XYZ. So I learned my alphabet in Jersey. So I have an Americanized alphabet. My dad stuck with the company that hired him to this day, and they for the chemical engineering work. And he's been all over the place. We grew up in Thailand for a year in the 90s. And we actually, before this interview, I was talking about how on the way back home, we went through Korea, and I got to see the World Expo in '93 in Daejeon, Korea. And then we went to Halifax, Nova Scotia. And then from Halifax, Nova Scotia, I went then we went back to Toronto. And from Toronto, I went to the University of Notre Dame. And then from there, I was inspired to go back to Bangladesh, where my parents are from. But throughout this, we had gone to Bangladesh many, many times. It's part of the reason for that is because before I was born, my maternal grandfather was in an accident and became a paraplegic. So whereas my dad's parents could come and visit us no matter where we were, they came to visit us when we were in Toronto, they came to visit us when we were in New Jersey, we would have to visit Bangladesh for my mom to see her parents because her dad was a paraplegic. And so there are photos of me in diapers in Bangladesh. And so I've been there many, many times before I first started this project in 2007.
Wow, that really is really all over the place.
I know.
Now, I have to ask you this. When a lot of people, especially those right out of college, decide to come to Asia, maybe it's for travel, maybe it's to teach English, that's how they decide to come here. But your journey took a very different route. How did you make the decision to leave North America and go back to Bangladesh on a more permanent basis?
That is a very good question because I hated the place growing up. In fact, part of the reason if you can speak Bengali and you've seen my videos, my Bengali is rubbish. I hated Bangladesh so much. Growing up, I said, Bangladesh is some backwards third world country. Don't ever talk to me in Bengali. I'm born in Canada. Canada is an English country, or English and French, but it's an English country. Speak to me only in English and don't teach me your culture. I don't want to do anything with Bangladesh. and I don't know what happened between then and now. What happened was, like, for starters, my parents would take me there quite often, and I hated it growing up. Like, I just absolutely hated being taken there. And but they would remind me that, hey, we survived the war. If our luck was ever so slightly different, you would either not exist or you would be that kid on the street. And there was no shortage of kids they could point at on the streets.
Well, and that's a very powerful message too.
Yeah. And so eventually, like, narcissistic Shawn got replaced by, self-conscious Shawn as he grew up. And so I realized, like, oh, I really need to do something for people who are not as lucky as me. And so that's what kind of inspired me. I felt like I wasn't helping others. I was just helping people who could have been into situations I could have easily been born into had my luck just been different.
Oh, wow. Now, how would you actually describe what you do now?
When I'm, like, if I have 10 seconds with someone, I say I do charity work. It's in Bangladesh. But the fact of the matter,
that is so not what you do.
It's way more complicated than that. For starters, I'm not an organization, and I'm not incorporated as a 501c3 or anything, and I'm also not an NGO. I'm really literally just a guy with a computer, a laptop, a camera, and some crowdfunding tools. And I go out to Bangladesh and using social media, and social media has changed considerably over the last 8 years, and it wasn't even called social media way back then. But what we now know is social media. I've been telling stories on those platforms and getting people to engage on the issue of poverty. And initially it was me showing people how a little bit of money goes a long way using money I privately fundraised. But thanks to some YouTube celebrities, Hank and John Green of the Vlog Brothers, John Green wrote The Fault in Our Stars and Looking for Alaska, they convinced me, hey, you should set up a PayPal account and do the same thing you're doing now, but with people giving money from around the world. And thousands of dollars came in, like, within hours of setting that up. And from that, it just kind of grew.
A few months ago, I was a student at the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. I decided to put my dreams of getting a graduate degree on hold after one day in 2006 when Notre Dame decided to cancel all its classes to talk about an issue that's very important to the entire world, and that's the issue of global health. They brought some of the greatest minds from around the world to talk to us, and one of the people they brought was Dr. Jeffrey Sachs. He's author of the book called The End of Poverty, and the message in his book is very simple. Poverty can be eliminated within our lifetime. The average person on YouTube is under 30 years old, and that means within our lifetime, within the lifetime of the average YouTube viewer, poverty can be eliminated. It's not guaranteed, but we don't need
I realized that one of the things I didn't want to do is I didn't want to be the guy that made a lot of DIY mistakes, like do-it-yourself aid. And so after raising a few $1,000s, the first thing I did was reach out to established nonprofits. And one of the highest and most reputable nonprofits in Bangladesh in terms of local opinion is Save the Children, which says a lot because Bangladesh has a huge distrust of NGOs. Like in Bengali, there's a saying, NGOs taka khai fele, which literally translates to NGOs or charities eat the cash. They don't give it away, they eat it.
Well, no, that's
Yeah.
not just in Bangladesh, but it's around the world. If you look at the financial reports of so many organizations, whether it be an NGO or a charitable one, you see how much money goes to staff, marketing, whatever, and very little tends to go to the people that you're actually trying to raise money for.
And not only that, like you have situations where you have Greg Mortensen, where he's this like very charismatic guy, and he's like, "Oh, I built all these schools in Afghanistan," and then 60 Minutes goes and like, "Hey, where are these schools?" Or how come you're spending so much money promoting your book with these donations? So Save the Children in Bangladesh kind of bucked the trend of that reputation. Like, yes, of course they have money for overhead. Yes, of course they have staff, and they have resources and infrastructure that they invest in, but generally speaking, both in America with their Charity Navigator rating and also in Bangladesh on the ground as general reputation, they have a really high opinion. Like people say, they actually do the real thing. And so, with the money I raised with Hank and John, we did initially some projects in Bangladesh together, and the goal was not to really build my brand or anything because all my work is called the Uncultured Project, and it's specifically kind of named that because it was a nonsensical name that wasn't really meant to become a big brand. And so I would use my social media platforms to raise awareness about Save the Children in these initial projects and get people to start donating to them instead of me.
You bring up a very interesting point here, partnering with the NGOs to, get your feet wet, to learn more about what you need to do. Why did you choose to go at it by yourself instead of just teaming up and, essentially working with an NGO, joining Save the Children or some other organization?
There are multiple reasons why I didn't do it that way. First off, it was 2007 and I was a grad student at the University of Notre Dame, and this trip was supposed to be a 2-month trip that turned into a 4-month trip that turned into an 18-month trip. Now it's in year 8. So when I was first doing this, I approached NGOs and like, this internet thing, it's going to be big. Like people in college who are my age, they're reading Facebook news feeds as opposed to newspapers. They're watching YouTube in their dorms as opposed to TV. So if you want to reach them, you're going to have to focus on these platforms. The other thing is they are very savvy. You can get away with, when you had 3 channels on TV and only 3 and you had a captive audience, you could get away with a super guilty ad of black and white music, thinking of like, think of the children, look at these, and look, flies on their faces. Look at how they're not talking.
Oh, yeah,
and
I remember those.
I, the white person, will speak on behalf of these black children. Give us your money, or you're a bad person. Kind of guilt ads. We call in the industry now. We call these poverty porn. Or I don't know how much part of the quote unquote the industry I am, but like in like the charity aid community sector, this is called poverty porn. And back then, that was the de facto method of reaching people, whether it was in print or radio and television. Poverty porn is how they got money. And yes, the studies show you can get like an initial surge of money through guilting people, but to sustainably get people invested, you need more than guilt. And I said, the better solution is positivity, letting people speak for themselves. Don't, guilt people into donating. Get them as being happy to be part of this big solution. And so that's what I was trying to impress upon them. And they were like, no, we have the studies. We know that this form of messaging works. We're not going to go that route. And yes, we know the internet's this thing, but Facebook is, YouTube is for cat videos. Facebook is for people just to talk about, who they're dating or whatever. It's not a platform we have the time or the money or resource or interest investing in. And I'm like, well, I'm going to have to show you by just doing it.
Hey YouTube, I'm making this video because I wanted to talk about a few things. First off, there's been some milestones that have been happening. The Uncultured Project videos have now been seen over 500,000 times, and there are over 1,000 subscribers to the channel. I really gotta thank you guys. I can't thank you enough for this. I said from the start, I'm not trying to become a YouTube celebrity, so why am I worried about views, subscriptions, and ratings? The reason being is I'm trying to change the conversation about poverty. There's a lot I don't like in the media, both on TV and on the internet, about poverty. quite frankly, I think that does a disservice. Anything that makes us feel bad about ourselves or makes us feel guilty doesn't really get us any closer to solving global poverty. Focusing too much on donations really oversimplifies the problem of how to end extreme poverty. And finally, making the poor
And initially in like 2007 or 8, it actually got really popular. It overtook like Bono in terms of subscribers on compared to the One campaign. It got more views than the United Nations. It got more subscribers than all the charities around the world combined for a short period of time. Like they've caught up and left me in the dust. But there was this one glorious golden age where charities were looking like, who is this guy in Bangladesh with this camera beating us in social media?
Oh, yes, and I will fully disclose that I remember seeing you back in those days and contributing, for Project for Awesome to make sure that you get some money because you were doing great work that the other people weren't doing. Going back to the very beginning, I have to ask you this question. A lot of people, when they want to do something charitable, they simply just make the donation, or maybe they go down to the local shelter to donate a little time. But you actually put your money, your time, your life where your mouth was. What were those initial weeks like? Did you ever have a moment that you just sat down and said, what the hell did I get myself into?
Oh God, all the time, all the time. But before I mention the first initial weeks, I just wanted to mention that I think what made it possible for me, there's like a great deal of romanticism about like, oh, packing your get bags and going to across the world. But in many respects, what I was doing was going back to part of my community. I'm Bengali. I'm part of the Bangladeshi community.
Oh, and you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. You're
Expat.
going back to where you'd been several times before.
Yeah. And I'm part of the expat Bangladeshi community. Like we call ourselves the Bangladeshi diaspora because a lot of people just fled the country after the war and set up lives elsewhere. So I have relatives in Australia that are part of the diaspora, in America and in Canada. We're all part of this Bangladeshi post-war diaspora. And so if you're an American or a Canadian or, an Australian, my advice is like to focus on helping your community. And so sometimes that might be a community that's around the corner, like, your church group or the food bank. But for me, it just happened because I'm part of the diaspora, the Bangladesh diaspora, that my community was thousands of miles away, in Bangladesh. And that's what kind of made it possible. Like I was living with my grandmother. She had an old house, which was older than Bangladesh itself because
oh, wow.
it was, yeah. So basically it was built by my maternal grandfather's own hands. And that's actually how he became a paraplegic. He was working on the second story, was inspecting a wall that hadn't been completed, and tripped and fell off the incomplete second story because the walls hadn't been fully put up yet. And so he lived and died in that house. And then my grandmother wants to live and die in that house. And so that house, as she tells me, it's older than it was around when the British ruled the land, as she told me. It's been around since the Pakistanis were ruling it as part of, West or East Pakistan, and now it's part of Bangladesh. And so that's older than, my parents, older than the country. And so I lived there, and it was a lot of getting used to. Like one of the things I didn't really talk about is that before coming to Bangladesh to start the project, I actually went and saw a hypnotherapist in Toronto before going to Bangladesh because I knew in the past, anytime I went, I would have anxiety and panic attacks at cockroaches. Now, I don't know if your viewers know, like Bangladesh tropical cockroaches are some of the most insane insects in the world. They're bigger than like.
So you're
they're almost. Yeah,
so,
they're
so,
almost
so maybe like the most horrific Africanized cockroach you'd ever see in the United States.
Yeah, yeah. So like they're the size of like a flip phone, and they can fly, but not controlled flight, but fly. So sometimes if they hear a sound, many insects will instinctively run away from you. Cockroaches will run at you, or sometimes take up uncontrolled flight towards you, and so and they are everywhere. Like one of the things I remember growing up on some of my trips to Bangladesh is that I would like go downstairs or rummage field with my hands in the dark at night to turn on the light switch, and I turn on the light switch and all of a sudden I hear And
Oh
as my eyes
no.
gain focus, I'm like, there's a horde of cockroaches everywhere going into the corners. And the fact that they're no longer on the ground, it doesn't really matter because they're in the walls and they're everywhere. And so you just freak out and you don't like. One time, my brother was and I were in the bedroom, and we were sleeping, and we found a cockroach in our bed, and he couldn't go back to sleep for the for the rest of the
Oh
night. And
my
he
gosh.
yeah, and so this is one of the things I tried to get used to. I went to did hypnotherapy because I'm like, I'm going to be doing charity work there. I can't be like freaking out and screaming every time I see a cockroach, and it worked. But still, it's something like it's things that you really can't get used to. Like for example, the power would cut out with rolling blackouts for like 8 or 10 hours a day because my grandmother, she lived in an upscale part of the neighborhood back in the day, but now it's lower middle class. And so when the rains would come, the sewers would overflow. So we'd have sewer water on the ground floor of my grandmother's house, and we had this system set up where you'd put like chairs, and you'd take two chairs. You'd stand on one chair above the floodwater, and then you'd move while standing on the chair. You'd move the second chair to where you want to go. Then you step on that chair, and then you turn around and you move that. You take your original chair and you move that forward to where you want to go next. So you'd walk. It's like walking on stilts, but with chairs.
Oh
And
my
we and
gosh.
my mom would do this, and other people would do this to avoid touching like the sewer water that had flooded. And also like if you're trying to do work like video editing, it's very hard to do much when you have like a laptop that maybe will last 2 hours, but your power is out for like 8 or 10. And also there's the intense heat. It's not just like hot, it's like a tropical heat. And so you're constantly sweating, and then you want to take a shower. And in the case of my grandmother's house, the water system wasn't good, and especially if it flooded, then you'd have contaminated water. So sometimes what happened is my grandmother would put like little, you know, it's not plastic bags, it's like those fabric bags
Oh
that,
yeah.
yeah, those fabric bags, like jute or cloth. So she'd take a cloth bag, cut off a piece, and put it on the faucet. And the reason why she did that is so that the worms wouldn't come out of the faucet.
Oh my
And so,
gosh.
yeah, and so it was. You have to understand. I'm used to, you know, central heating and AC, a hot water. Like I come from the
Continuous
culture.
powered central
Yeah,
heating, good air
exactly,
conditioning.
exactly.
Well, I wouldn't say fast internet because it was North America, but
Yeah,
yeah.
and all of that didn't exist. And just because I was from Bangladesh as a culture doesn't mean I was by any means used to handling this kind of hardship. And I was very spoiled growing up, compared to like people in Bangladesh. I one of my first people that I did a story about was this kid who walks around selling bottles in exchange, or he takes people's used bottles, sells the bottles for recycle money, but he gives people onions in return. So people can turn a bottle to him, and they get onions, and he makes his profit because of the price difference between what he gets on the bottles and what he has to buy the onions for.
That's
And
brilliant.
it's brilliant. But I was thinking, when I was that age, I would complain that that my parents didn't buy me the latest video game,
Right.
or they didn't give me enough time to watch TV. So I felt incredibly spoiled, you know, uh, in this trip and in my time there. And so the first few weeks, I knew it was going to be hard, but it just, I didn't realize how hard it would be.
What do you think was the most surprising thing that you found out about yourself during those initial weeks that then turned into months?
That's a good question. I keep saying that, but that's a good question. I have an answer for like what happened over the years,
Hmm.
but for the first few months, I would have to say for the first few months, I really didn't. A lot of my relatives didn't think I had the staying power. They saw this as like a quirky thing I would do just for a couple of weeks or maybe a couple months. But then they saw me having a real staying power, and so much as expanding my ticket to keep staying for 2 months, turned to 4 months, turned to 18 months. So they didn't realize that I would that I was willing to tough out a whole Bangladeshi year in there.
Well, and
Um,
not just a year, but now you're there, what, 8 years now?
yeah, on and off 8 years. Uh, the change I between the time I stepped on that airplane 8 years ago and me now is much bigger. I can tell you more changes. I could speak to more changes that happened to me in those years, over 8 years, as opposed to the first few months.
So if you look at this entire period, these 8 years, compare and contrast yourself, the Shawn in 2007, 2008 versus the Shawn today.
That's so much easier because a lot of people can just see it from the photos. Um, I was 270 pounds when I flew to Bangladesh, and actually I was kind of a spectacle because in a country where like 80% of the country earns less than $2 a day, that's like the latest statistics I looked up. But half was considered to be in extreme poverty or poverty. I was kind of a spectacle. Like, who is this guy that has had access to so much food that can be such a big fat man? Um, and so right now I've lost between then and now I've lost over 100 pounds. I used to be a double XL, and now some of my clothes are small or medium. Uh, there's also it's not just a visual change, but in terms of like accepting myself. And I think the biggest and most surprising thing that happened to me is now I'm out and gay, and I'm out openly gay. Rather, I was always gay then, but I was like, I'm out and gay, and uh, at the time I was still in self denial. And when I went there, I thought, well, I thought a million things. I thought, oh, it's just a phase, and I can distract myself with charity work, or oh, it's just something, or as the years progressed, I'm like, oh, I can't pray away the gay. What I will do is I'll dive into more charity work, and I'll distract myself and fulfill my life with charity work and doing service for other people. And that didn't work. And eventually, like around my 30th birthday, I finally, not publicly, but accepted myself. And I realized that it doesn't really matter how much charity work you do or how much you help others. You need to, you'll still have that emptiness if you don't accept yourself. And I tried to start accepting myself, and I tried to start, trying to find, if I can have a romantic future. The first go of it wasn't very great. It was actually a very abusive experience, which led to a threat, which led me to out myself. And I outed myself in December 2012.
Hello. If you've never seen me before, my name is Shawn Ahmed. I run something or created something called the Uncultured Project, which is my work as an individual to do charity work and do charity projects and raise awareness on issues that are important to me. Right now, I am in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is actually where most of my work takes place. And I'm actually doing this live because I need to make an important announcement or talk about something, and I say need because I really don't want to do this. Because what I'm about to say will potentially put me at risk here in Bangladesh, potentially end the Uncultured Project permanently, and cut me off from a lot of family members. And that is, I will be basically coming out in this video. I am gay. And the reason why I'm doing this live is because I have scripted this, planned this, making videos, I've rehearsed, and none of it comes out right.
And it's actually been a huge roller coaster since then. My parents reacted by offering to arrange a marriage to me. They offered to arrange a marriage to a woman, thinking that would solve things. Then, I used to have a lot of relatives who were part of the Bangladesh diaspora. For example, I have a relative in Dallas, Texas, and whenever I'm in America, it doesn't matter where in the continent or where in America I am, I have to go through Dallas because that's how close I am to those relatives. One of my cousins in high school wrote a high school paper as how I'm their hero. They had to write a paper on their hero, and they didn't choose like a historical character. They chose me. And when I came out, she unfriended me. Her parents unfriended me and told me never to show up in the house again.
Oh man.
Um, and so by then, I was doing a lot of interfaith work. You had mentioned that a lot of the work I've been able to do, regular charities haven't been able to touch or do similar programs.
Hmm.
And I think part of the reason is there's an interest to be neutral in your charity work. Like Save the Children doesn't specifically say we're going to do interfaith work with the Catholic minority because they're being oppressed. But I, not being a charity, can say, hey, there are Muslim extremists out there. They're hurting minorities in Bangladesh. I'm going to help minorities to not only just help them, but also with the specific message of quelling extremism in the country, in a small way. And by then, when I came out in 2012, I was trying to help the Catholic Church. There's 0.1% of the population of Bangladesh, which is over 160 million people. 0.1% is Catholic, and 90% is Muslim. And so you have this situation where, like, some Muslims will sometimes take advantage or oppress minority groups there. And I thought, what better way to try and stem that tide than build a Catholic school? A place where not just Catholics can go to, but Muslims and Hindus and Christians can all go together and sit side by side and learn from a great education system. And I don't mean like religious education. I mean like, learning, reading, writing, math, and sciences together. The reason I'm rambling is that when I came out in 2012, I was a guest of the Catholic Church. And so when my parents started proposing arranged marriages, when that family started disconnecting with me, they let me live with them kind of as a sanctuary for several months. And then using the internet, I was able to couch surf for over a year in Bangladesh and try and continue to do my charity work, but also just like have some distance, some much needed distance from my parents. My parents even proposed to give me a plane ticket to a Middle Eastern country where there's a death penalty for gays, and I declined that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so an experience like that can change you. And I think there was a point, well, many of my friends know that especially around when the threat to out me came, I was thinking of killing myself. I thought it would be easier than disgracing my family. And so the reason why I outed myself instead of killing myself is that, well, let's see how bad it can get. Let's see how bad I can kill myself anytime. Let's see how bad it can get. So I did out myself. And from that came a strength, ultimately, I think, came a strength that allowed me to realize, hey, I survived this. I'm badass enough to survive this horrible hell that I'm going through.
No. I think you're right on the money there. I mean, I remember watching the video where you outed yourself, and to see where you've come since then shows the enormous internal strength that you have, the incredible commitment that you have towards your project, because I think a lot of people would just say, I'm going through this, I'm going to step back and focus on me and not do anything possibly for the rest of their lives. But you actually, really took the time to do that personal introspection and really put everything into perspective and came out, I think, well ahead of how most people would have fared in a similar situation.
And I actually, I can't thank you for saying that, because it's still some days it's still pretty bad, but it's a bad day today is nothing compared to the bad days when I first came out. And the first year was just horrible. I tried to do charity work. I was in Bangladesh to do charity work, but instead what I would do is I'd just stay curled up in a ball in a place where I was couch surfing and just cry all day. And it was actually the Catholic Church that kind of prodded me. That, hey, there's these kids that need schools. We know you love building schools, and we know you're good at fundraising. You should help these kids. If you can cry in between helping these kids. You help these kids. And so and it also helped that Hank and John Green, with their support, I won some funds for the Project for Awesome, which is their annual charity contest, and it beat out many big name NGOs. And so I won money when big NGOs didn't. And with that money, which was held in trust, because I'm not an organization, so it just held it in trust for me to route to organizations I wanted to team up with. I was able to create this slum school and build more schools. And there's actually some money still left over from that 2012 winnings, which we could use as in like the community that helped me to build a couple more schools potentially
the YouTube community,
this year.
along with Nerd Fighters, are funding a construction of a school right here in this rural village in Bangladesh. But this is more than just about helping the poor through education. This is about fostering interfaith cooperation and tolerance. Here in Bangladesh, it starts with the three major religious groups behind the construction of this school. Muslims, including me, an engineer who helped design the school, and the construction supervisor. Hindus, including most of the parents, students, and some of the teaching staff. Last but not least, Christians, of which the Catholic Church will be taking a lead role in helping to run and operate this school after it's built. It's also important to note that this isn't about converting people from one religion to another. আপনি Christian?
না আমরা ক্ষত্রি আমরা খ্রিস্টানকে খুব ভালোবাসি আমার খুব ভালো লাগে
Looking back over this past almost decade, what do you think has let me rephrase that. What do you think is your biggest accomplishment?
And that pause is me trying to say that's a good question. Not to say something other than that. That's a good. Okay, so there is big in terms of like scope and scale. I could say the biggest project.
Okay. Let me rephrase it. Let me rephrase it. Okay.
All right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, what are you most proud of?
Because when you were going to ask what's biggest, I would say scope and scale, but then I could tell you the little thing which I was proud of. Let me answer both, I guess. In terms of scope and scale, I would have to say the biggest project I've done is when I teamed up with Save the Children, and together we helped 10,000 kids on this small island in Bangladesh. So many children don't survive to the age of 5, and they don't survive for the most basic reasons, like they get diarrhea and they die, or they get pneumonia and they die, or they get malnourished and they die. And these are actually things you can prevent. For example, and it doesn't even cost like a huge amount of money. Some of it is just education. Like when parents have a kid with diarrhea, they're like, oh, my child is, defecating a lot. I guess he has too much food. I'll just give him less food. And so that's one way they die. And so what Save the Children does is they hire local women to be educators or health workers in each of their communities. So they're from the village. And then they go to the parents, say, oh, no. If your baby has diarrhea, you should feed them first as much or more food than you are now. And also to give them saline or saline to help for the dehydration. Another thing is if they have pneumonia. And so they trained these women to monitor the breathing and time it to see if the breathing pattern is something that needs to be looked at. And so sometimes if a baby has a fever, it's just a general fever, or sometimes if it's pneumonia, you can detect it, and then from that you can get further medical treatment. So early detection is one of the keys. And other things are like general health. Like, for example, one of the myths in villages is that many in-laws will tell their daughters or daughters-in-law is that, oh, if you eat a lot of food, you'll have a fat baby, and the fat baby it'll be hard to give birth to a fat baby. And the health workers are like, no, it's natural to want to be very hungry when you're pregnant. You're eating for 2. That myth is not true, that you cannot eat too much to have and have trouble giving birth to a fat baby. And so it's breaking these myths and generally educating the people. And with that, we helped 10,000 kids because we helped 96 health workers in over 96 villages, each of whom will serve many, many kids. And also we provided some medical equipment like weighing scales or Salter scales, which are highly precise scales specifically for young and children, newborns, that they can be weighed on and they can have their weight monitored. And if they're malnourished, these health workers will help them get something called plumping up, which will help them gain weight and get the calories they need if they're malnourished. And so that's the biggest scale. And then you could also say the other equally big one is the John Green School, where it took years of negotiation with the Catholic Church and help from a friend of a rabbi who's in Brooklyn and me going to the World Economic Forum. So I had to secretly make all these connections and contacts behind the public's eye to negotiate me living with the Catholic Church and building a Catholic school with them as part of this interfaith work. And that was also big. And I think it might even be a bit precedent to them. I'm not sure how many Muslims go around funding and helping the construction of Catholic schools. But as big as these are, I would have to say the most meaningful moments for me are ones that aren't even on video. There was this one woman in 2008 or 9. It was in a coastal town in Bangladesh, and she was one of the survivors of Cyclone Sidr. Cyclone Sidr was a hurricane, or a cyclone as they call it over there, several magnitudes bigger than Katrina, and it destroyed many communities, many towns. And she was a survivor, and one of the things I had done is, with the help of the Canadian government, I teamed up with a local NGO, and with a corporate sponsor, I was giving roofing materials. And this lady showed up immaculately dressed, like in this amazing sari, this very ornate sari. And she got her roofing material and she left. Then afterwards, I went to the villages, or the small, the communities, to see them deploy the roofing supplies. And what happened was, I saw her again, and she was dressed in tatters. I'm like, why'd you change your clothes? And she said, well, I didn't want people to think I'm poor, so I dressed up. But this is how I normally dress. And so she explained to me that she was married, but her in-laws tried to convince her husband that he could do better, that she's too poor for him, and that he could do better than that. And so he just left her. No divorce, no alimony. He just left her.
Oh, it's horrible.
And she had some kids. And so he left the kids, he left her to marry someone richer and higher status than her. And she has no means of contacting him, and I guess to my knowledge, no means of contacting him, but definitely no support from him whatsoever. And so she works, and you think, okay, she can earn a living, but she doesn't actually earn money. She works as a servant, and she gets paid in scraps of food, and occasionally some cash as tips. And by cash, I mean, like, she would say, what was it? So when she would get paid, they would sometimes give her like 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 taka. So she would get less than $1 if she got paid in cash, but it was usually just in kind of payment, like food or clothing or scraps. And so that's how she was supporting her family. And so what I did is I said, let's bring her back to the NGO office, and I gave her several thousand taka, not like a huge amount, like pretty much what you get in a microfinance loan in many cases, but I gave it as a grant. And her face just lit up, and all of a sudden she started talking about ideas of what she could do to pull herself out of poverty. Like she said, with this money I can buy a chicken. With this chicken, the chicken can lay eggs, and with the eggs I can sell the eggs, and then I can have a business. And so, and even if she never ever spent the money in that way, just the fact that someone out there cared enough for her. Like, you have to understand, Mother Nature told her that she's not worth much because her home got wiped out by a cyclone. Her husband told her she's not worth much because she got not even divorced, not even the dignity of divorce. She just got abandoned, and she just got left. The guy just left, And then society told her that she's not worth anything because she didn't even get a proper salary. So I don't mean any hubris or anything, but I felt like maybe I was the first person to show her that she was worth something, the time to step aside, specifically help her with something unique to her. And so even if the 2,000 taka was helped her buy an immediate need that she had, as opposed to like help her invest, it was still, that connection meant more to me than helping the 10,000 kids, because it's a story that still sticks with me, almost 6 years later.
Oh, wow. And it really is a great story, and really shows how much you can dial into the people that you're working with and see their potential and see what they can become. Shawn, before we go, how can people become involved with your project?
The best way is through social media. It's very hard to get people interested in charity work, especially since now other charities are very much in the social media space. So sometimes if I make a video with how they can help or an interesting story, it doesn't get viewed a lot nowadays. So helping share the video, share the work, taking a look at the work, and more importantly, when I do get involved in the Project for Awesome contest, which has been the major funding source for me for the past couple years, if they could vote for my work. And if this year I didn't get enough votes, so I have no money from the Project for Awesome this year. But if I do it again this December, people voting for this work, it could lead to big things. But I'm not sure where exactly I am in terms of what's going to happen in the next 12 months.
Shawn, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with me. I really do appreciate it. And I actually hope that everyone out there listening found it as thrilling and interesting as I did.
Oh, my pleasure.
You can follow Shawn at Uncultured on Twitter and uncultured.com, where he posts updates and videos about his various projects. Now, before I go, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love for you to share with me, what does giving back mean to you? Please leave your thoughts in the comments on Facebook or Twitter. That'll do it for me this week. I'll return on Monday morning with the Asia Brief. Until then, be sure to keep up with more news from the region by following Asian News Weekly on Facebook or Twitter. You can also send an email to the show with your questions, your comments, and your feedback. Just drop a line to podcast@asiannewsweekly.net. If you enjoyed today's program, please share it with your friends, and while you're at it, subscribe. It's absolutely free to do. You can do so on YouTube, on our website, asiannewsweekly.net, or in your favorite podcast application like iTunes or Stitcher. It's absolutely free, and when you do, that next episode is delivered automatically to you. All right, my friends, thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, my name is Steve Miller, reminding you to be true to yourself and to always be awesome.